Welcome, friends. My name is Erin Sharif. I am here with Peter Wohl. And the reason that we are here is we wanted to create a space for mindfulness practitioners and students of Buddhism to come together to discuss, talk about, feel into the really important issues of the day, and to create a space that is kind of a middle ground in between helplessness and despair, and spiritual bypassing and magical thinking. These are really critical times on the planet, as I'm sure everyone is well aware, and it's important for all of us to show up fully empowered and to not pretend that these things are not happening. And so Peter and I started to have some really playful, important, meaningful, profound conversations around all of this. And we thought it might be of service to bring this out into the world. And so, Peter, if you don't mind, I would love for you to introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks, Erin. So I am Peter Wohl, and I am a Zen Buddhist priest and teacher. I am a registered Maine guide and a few other things. When you get old, you have a lot of titles. But I have been involved with the natural world essentially my entire life, and I've had a deep and abiding love of it, particularly through my adult years. But at the same time, I became very much exploitive and bought into an anthropocentric perspective. The result of which was that I was not intimate with the natural world. I was not deeply, in a caring way, involved, and I used it to my advantage. And that's something that's changed for me over the years, and certainly part of what brings me to wanting to do this with Erin and look forward. To me, this is an exploration. This is an adventure. We're going in the door. We don't know where we're going, but hey, the times are calling for it. There's such enormous stresses and concerns right now. I think having this dialogue is really important.
Thank you, Peter. Beautifully stated. And so my path is somewhat similar. My first career was as a healthcare provider, physician assistant, primary care provider, transitioned at some point into a mindfulness teacher to fill the gaps that I saw in the healthcare system. Really was not solving a lot of problems. It was mostly chronic disease management. And I saw mindfulness as a tool to empower people, to help with behavior change and things like that. But along the way, something curious started to happen to me. And the more I started practicing, the more awakening, you might say, that I started to have. And I started to see my relationship with all beings in a different way. Initially, I saw mindfulness as a tool, if you will, but all sorts of things started to happen. I started looking at the world in a new way and saw the ways that I was being exploitive with the natural world, using it to my advantage, as Peter said, and started to fall in love, really, in a very deep way, with all beings, and saw the interconnection and saw the size of the thread that connects all of us. And suddenly suffering and disease took on a whole new meaning, and started to really ask questions in a new way, started to wanting to have more deep conversations about all of this. And this evolution of the heart, you might say, really led me to want to share these teachings more widely, to encourage people to also fall in love with the natural world and all beings in a new way. Because I think if that were to happen, we wouldn't necessarily need to talk about all the legislation, all the technology, all these other kind of downstream solutions. If we just all suddenly woke up and remembered the interconnection of all of it, the behavior would naturally start to change. So these are the conversations that Peter and I were sharing and having, and that we felt may be important to bring out to the wider community.
You know, Erin, as you were talking, and I was kind of reflecting that both of our stories, to some extent, involved how our practice, in your case, mindfulness practice, in my case, more formal Zen practice, transformed our relationship to the world. And so that should be our disclaimer here. If you like yourself just like you are, shut this off right now. Never go sit on a meditation cushion, because if you engage in these practices, you know, our relationship to the world changes, our relationship to ourselves changes, and in ways that are not sometimes subtle, but always profound. I mean, that's the wonderful thing that happens. But I think what we're going to be looking at and questioning more and more, and correct me if I'm wrong, Erin, is the fact that is that enough? What happens then? You know, when we sort of wake up, when we sort of say, yeah, I get this, and I understand this relationship of one body, and that everything is interconnected deeply, and that everything affects everything else. It's like, okay, what now?
Yeah. What now? What now? And your comment made me think of something that one of my teachers says, which is that you're all perfect exactly as you are, and you all need a little work. And so I think that's, true for all of us, and holding both. We're all doing the best we can, and we're miraculous beings. And there are ways we can continually awaken and expand our compassion out to include all beings. And he also says that mindfulness, as a derivative of Buddhism, if you will, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about that distinction, Peter. It's like we're trying to drop things. We're trying to put down things that are no longer serving us, rather than the more acquisitive style of, okay, I need to get that, and then it'll all be good. Or, oh, I need to get that teaching, that thing, and then it'll all be good. It's more, okay, what can I put down? What am I carrying that's not serving me anymore? So there's something a little bit freeing in that as a concept as well.
Yeah, as you're speaking about that, I started thinking there's a formal Buddhist teaching of the three poisons: greed, anger, and ignorance, right? And the greed poison is one that's so predominant in our world today. And I don't exempt, as I speak of these things, I'm sort of never exempting myself. I'm sort of guilty of all the foibles and follies of being a human being in the world today. But we have this whole mega system that's designed to make us consume, that's designed to make us want more. And as Erin says, to never be satisfied. It's like, okay, I'm not okay today because I haven't got the next thing that I need to be okay. And then I get that thing, and oops, I'm still inadequate in some way. I'm still not, and I agree certainly with what Erin said. At a deep level, we are all absolutely complete and perfect. We are missing nothing. We are lacking nothing. But we don't see that. Living in this relative existence, we're constantly told and made to feel that we are less than, that we need more, and so on and so forth. And that's the disease that's infecting the world today. Is our this really rises to the level of addiction. It's our addiction with things, our addiction with acquisitions, our addictions with power, with control, with so many of these things that are so very destructive.
It's hearing you talk, Peter. There's something really cathartic, I think, to just shine a light on all of this and name it and turn towards it. Because if we can't do that, how can we possibly find solutions if we can't even name the problem? And I think you named it so concisely and clearly. But we live in a society that runs on craving. It runs on greed, right? We got to get more, more, more. I need a bigger house. I need a newer car. I need the latest gadget. You know, if I have that latest personal care product, if I, maybe that drug's going to help me. It's like, okay, when is it enough? There's no situation built into our society where we humans can check a box and say, okay, it's enough. It's enough. And so in some ways, is mindfulness, Buddhism, antithetical to capitalism? And how do we humans who appreciate these teachings, who have found value and some refuge in these teachings, how do we navigate this society that we find ourselves in? And I think these are really important discussions to be having. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Peter.
The other thing that came up for me as you said that is, I think that what you just said is a truth that's fairly widely acknowledged. If people are awake at all in these times, they see this. But at the same time, that truth is, being awake is terribly uncomfortable, right? It sucks. and many people right now are electing to go different ways. I just this week was back in touch with someone, a dear friend and student who I hadn't heard from in over a year. And she has spent this last year plunged into a substance addiction. And it's just the reality of these times. And this is a very awake, wonderful woman. Very, but it just, she just slipped into that rabbit hole without knowing it. And so she just went and had to do a detox. It's like, oh my God, but I think that we're all in that boat to a greater or lesser extent. We're so bombarded with overwhelming crises that, our power to deal with and control is extremely limited. It's not that we are powerless, but our powers are limited. And these things are playing out on a global scale on one hand. And on the other hand, we're getting bombarded with information at a level that humanity has never had before. Mm-hmm. So 100 years ago, I knew what was going on in my village and down the road and a couple of villages over. And maybe, 2 weeks later, I heard what happened in Boston. Now I can, something can be happening in Ghana or, any place on the planet, and I know almost instantaneously. So that's the other thing. We are immersed in all of these crises, in all of these challenging situations, many of which are terrible and catastrophic. And what can I do?
Right.
And it does for me at times, that can paralyze me, that can depress me. That can just cause me to languish and be unable to get out of my own way.
Right. Those are really important things that you just mentioned, that there's no shortage of competition for our attention. And it can be really easy to just stay distracted, whether it's with a substance, alcohol, drugs, it could be shopping, it could be social media, it could be just doom scrolling and feeling like that's going to give us some sense of power and control if we're just continually updated on the latest tragedy around the world, which, as everyone knows, can fry out our nervous system and is not really that productive. And so how do we discern wisely what should get our attention? What is wise for me to attend to today? What is mine to do? What is mine to care about? And then what wise action comes from that thing that I care about? And I think these are the discussions that Peter and I were having, that how do we encourage ourselves, including ourselves in this community, to meet these challenges that we are all facing. We're not exempting ourselves. And to figure out, okay, what is wise action today? What is right speech for me today, to not get stuck in the despair and the overwhelm and the sense of well, there's nothing I can do. Look at these gigantic problems. I'm just going to go back to the scrolling or whatever it is, or to the substance, right? And to find empowerment. There's really empowerment and even joy from taking action towards that which we care about. And it can seem so tiny as maybe to be insignificant, but I don't think there's any wise, compassionate action today that is too small to take. And so discussing, encouraging, playing in this area of, all right, here's what I really care about. And if you're not sure what area is yours, what are you most upset about, right? It may be different. It will be different for all of us. Some people are passionate about protecting water. Some people, it's the land that they live on, or supporting and being an ally for the indigenous people, or supporting and sticking up for the four-leggeds, the winged ones, the aquatic ones. There are no shortage of causes that we can stand for. And so maybe getting some clarity around, what's your area? What are you most upset about? What are you most passionate about taking action towards and supporting? And then figuring out, all right, here's a tiny thing I can do. And then feeling that, now you've taken a step away from despair and disempowerment. And the vision of the world, if a lot of us, if most of us started doing that, things may well shift organically.
Well, so what you're pointing towards, I think, is the fact that I'm not sure the words hope or optimism are right, but certainly that the opposite is not right. That falling into despair, that falling into paralysis, to doing nothing, to avoiding, ignoring, repressing the things that are happening around us is not good. And I often say to my students, my Zen students, that the only wrong action that we can take is no action. And that anything that we're doing that's contributing, and the other kind of piece here that I think is important is kind of, how does our spiritual practice therefore not be almost an impediment, but how does it, as we open, as we awaken, as we feel more, as we are more in touch with the pain in the world, the suffering in the world, do we continue to transform that into meaningful change? And, one of the, and I wrestle with this a lot, because here I am, a practitioner of a 2,500-year-old religion based on the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha, who lived 2,500 years ago, and whose world, it cannot, there's an unimaginable difference between the world that the Buddha lived in and the world that we're living in today. And so for me, one of the very legitimate questions that I ask myself fairly continually is, what's the relevance, the significance of this practice in this 21st century? And as Erin sort of pointed out, there may almost be ways in which this makes us less comfortable, and because the more we attune to the suffering of other beings, including all the beings in the natural world, the more we recognize and feel their pain, the less comfortable we are. Who wants to do that? That's crazy. Right? And yet, I'm going to stop there, Erin, and do what you think.
Well, you said something that really struck me as important to unpack a little bit more, Peter, and that was, what happens if our spiritual practice becomes an impediment? And that, to me, is a really important thing for us to discuss here, because I saw that happen for myself, honestly. One of the most widely held definitions in mindfulness is that it's the awareness that arises when we pay attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. And a lot of times that non-judgmental piece gets confused and conflated with passive acceptance of everything around us, rather than, okay, I'm non-judgmental. I'm noticing that my mind is having aversion and craving and all of that, where I'm accepting that because it's happening. I'm not judging that because that's what a human mind does. But it doesn't imply that we, okay, well, now I don't do anything because I'm a mindfulness practitioner. And so I'm not judging that. It's like as if we were walking down the street and we saw someone stomping on a puppy, right? And okay, I'm not going to judge that. I don't judge. No, there were some things, some actions that we can see. And our wise discernment tells us that that is not a skillful action because it's causing harm. And in those cases, it's absolutely wise to take some action. So that's when you say spiritual practice can become an impediment. That's the piece that I think is really important to shine some light on, because I saw that happen in myself when I first started practicing, that I can't, it's not appropriate to, can't be angry. I can't experiencing anger. There's it's, no, let it all, it's all here, turning towards it. As you said, it's uncomfortable, but that's the crucible where we can let it all be, not judge it because it's here. And then somehow at some point, at least this is how it is for me, there's some nugget of clarity that arises that, okay, this is the wise action that I can take now. This is what's mine to do. We can't do everything, but there's almost always something that we can do, some action step that we can take. And that's where, to me, the empowerment comes from those little steps, and being the most fully engaged and alive and an active version of ourselves. To me, that's at the end of the day, at the end of my life. I don't know how this is all going to go down. Maybe a ton more species are going to go extinct. Maybe we're going to run out of water, all the things. But I just, at the end of it all, want to know that I did what was mine to do. And there's empowerment and there's real hope in that, not this false kind of magical hope.
Well, and you've raised this question of judging, which I think is a very interesting and important question. As I see it, there are two types of judgments. There's judgment that passes through the filter of our ego. And therefore, it's really about me. We have a precept that says that I vow to take up the way of not elevating myself and blaming others. And that ego-based judgment does exactly that. It can't not, even if it's just implicit. Oh, boy, she's done that wrong. Ha ha ha. Whatever the judgment is. And this judgment that doesn't pass through the filter of the ego, that's naming the reality and the suffering that is in front of our eyes. And those to me are very different things. And I'm sort of on my limb here, but I'm perfectly willing to go out on this limb and say that latter kind of judgment is not only acceptable, it is absolutely necessary. That as practitioners of Buddhism or of mindfulness, we're not trying to be indifferent sociopaths. We're trying to be more deeply committed, more deeply concerned, more deeply involved in the world and in the suffering in the world. To me, I'm a Mahayana practitioner. I accept and welcome the Bodhisattva at archetype. And to me, that archetype implies involvement. It implies action. It implies caring and concern for the world. But again, not through the filter of myself, but more or less openly being aware. And okay, now I'm going to sound like a damn Buddhist, judging by not judging.
That was beautifully stated. That was beautifully stated, that we don't want to have our practice be a crutch of indifference and sociopathy, because we, in some sense, are the ones that we want to be engaged in the world, um, out there, on committees, talking to people, taking action. And as you were talking, Peter, it just, I couldn't help but feel the contrast of the world that you were pointing towards and the world that we're actually living in, where everything is kind of so divided these days and feels like us versus them. And, this is somebody else's fault. Everything's somebody else's fault. And even just in the past 4 to 6 years, the divisiveness has seemed to really, really kind of grow and expand. And so it's just an interesting world that we're living in, when we are, believing in and honoring the teachings that you've been elucidating so clearly and beautifully. And then we look and we see the world around us. So do you have any thoughts on navigating that divide?
Well, I was thinking earlier today, I came to practice for probably the same reason that almost everybody comes to practice, was to alleviate my own suffering. There may be people who are far more wonderful than I, who come to, start sitting because they want to save all beings. No, we don't even say sentient anymore. We say all beings. But that wasn't why I came. And I don't think it's why most people come. We're in some form of pain. We have some form of suffering. And we're looking to make some sense out of this life. And that's why we start practicing. Right? But over time, I think for most people, there's kind of a transformation occurs, where our own self, our own ego, our own needs, they never go away. They don't go away, but they diminish in importance, and we open more to the pain of the world, the needs of the world, the suffering of the world, the joy of the world, all of it. We open the doors and we let it all in, and we're affected by it all. And again, the point of practice, as I see it, and I'm freely admit to being strongly opinionated, is not to make us better practitioners. It's not to be able to sit on the cushions better than anybody else, whatever. It's to take what we realize on the cushions into the world to transform the world. That's what I think ideally our practice should do for us. It should help us. It's a preparation, it's a tool, it's an opportunity to maybe get a little bit out of the small shell of the ego that we usually live in and function with. Breathe the air, the beautiful air that surrounds us, and then move into a phase of taking that into action. In the Zen ox herding pictures, the last picture is returning to the marketplace. We've got to go into the marketplace. We've got to get into the mud. We got to wrestle with the pigs, whatever it requires of
us. Yes. Bringing it off the cushion into the marketplace. That's where the rubber hits the road. Right? Because what good is all the peace and all the insights that we may be getting if we're not bringing it out and letting it come alive through our own physical form, right? That's the great privilege, I think, of being alive in these times, that we can bring, we could be walking, wisdom, or, this is obviously not where I'm claiming that I am, but that's what I aspire to. That's why I sit, not just so that I can sleep better or feel better, which I do, but to have some kind of an impact on the greater good. And hope is a verb, and it comes from those kind of actions. And for me, and maybe this is maybe a little bit of a nugget of enticement for people to make it more concrete. It makes the days feel more creative, more like anything is possible. And even when the news is so grim and dire, I know that if my intentions are wholesome and good, and I just keep practicing, not that I'm not going to make mistakes and continue to be an imperfect being, but there's always opportunities to bring some compassion, to be some compassion, to see something shift and change in a positive direction because of some action that I took. And so to know that bringing it into the marketplace, as you say, is not an abstraction. It's a very real thing that we can do right now, today.
Absolutely. And I would go even further to say that peace and contentment do not come from transforming ourselves into some sort of blank slate, a tabula rasa in the world, but rather from helping, engaging with, and acting to change the world. That is where we can begin to find peace and contentment. It's we can't be on the sidelines of the game and find the things that we're looking for. We have to get into the game. We have to throw our whole body and mind in. And when that happens, when we give our whole body and mind, then duality disappears. There's no self and other. There's no separation. We're truly living the Buddha's teaching. And at that point, we will experience the things that we thought, this kind of contentment or peace. If it doesn't come from doing nothing, it comes from engaging.
Get in the game, find peace. That's maybe that's our tagline. And maybe that's a good place to start to wrap up here. I think that's our intention, if this is of service, is to have this be a series of conversations between ourselves, perhaps inviting some guests to share some wisdom, and to be a source of inspiration for people to navigate these challenging times. And I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, Peter, as we wrap up here, but I'm just so appreciative of your wisdom, your willingness to be vulnerable and real, and to offer something that is of light and of value in this world.
Well, thank you for saying that. I'm never sure when I'm doing anything that has any value, but I do think, that I want to come back again to something that we've said before, which is that there's nothing that we're talking about here that isn't affecting us in very much the same ways. We never transcend our humanity. We are always human. We are always. And that's got some wonderful aspects to it. And it's got some less comfortable aspects, but it's the reality, And so to the extent that anyone is struggling with this, we're all struggling with this. And we're very much in this together. And I think Erin and I have talked at great length about how, one of the really powerful solutions, if you will, is community. And I think that's the other thing we're hoping to create here over time, is building more and more a community of folks who are committed to not to any particular outcome or even any particular path, but just to walking together, opening our eyes and seeing what can happen.
Beautifully stated, opening our eyes, opening our hearts, and walking together. I love it. I love it. Well, Peter, it's always such a joy to co-create with you. You have incredible wisdom to share. I'm so grateful. And I look forward to where this goes. We're co-creating this together. Anybody watching, listening has questions, topics you would like us to discuss, please let us know, and we'll continue the journey.
Absolutely. Thank you, Erin. Everybody who watches this, yes. We would like this to be as much of a dialogue as possible. So there will be opportunities for your thoughts, your questions. Feel free to tell us we're full of shit if you think we are. So, and we'll go forward together.
Together, absolutely. Thank you, Peter.